Hello there. A Milan judge has indicted 26 Americans and 5 Italians on charges related to an alleged CIA rendition. Now, that term refers to the abduction of suspects who are then interrogated in another country.
Muslim cleric Abu Omar claims he was the victim of a rendition. He says he was abducted from Milan and tortured in Egypt. Owen Fay has the story.
Abu Omar isn't speaking to the media, but his lawyer is, and describes the physical and emotional toll taken on a man held for 4 years without charge.
His health was bad. His mental state also was bad. So bad that he even tried to commit suicide 3 times. He was put in isolation. He could not talk to anyone. No visits allowed. But his family convinced him to stay in Egypt and not leave. He also agreed not to speak to the media. In return for dropping the case, they have offered him a sum of money. Of course, he did not agree to that.
Saturday will mark 4 years to the day since Abu Omar was taken off the streets of Milan in broad daylight. Eyewitnesses say he was forced into a van, driven to Aviano Air Force Base, from there to an American base in Germany, and eventually to Egypt, where he was thrown in jail and reportedly tortured. Now, with this court decision, this once secret U.S. policy of rendition faces its first major international challenge. The 26 American citizens facing charges include the former CIA station chief in Milan, who fled his Italian home for fear of prosecution. 5 Italians have also been indicted, among them Niccolo Polari, Italy's former military intelligence chief. The Bush administration has admitted rendering terrorist suspects, but has strongly denied all allegations of torture. But earlier this week, the European Union issued a report strongly criticizing member states, including Italy, of knowing about and then covering up CIA flights which transported the terrorist suspects. More than 1,200 CIA flights are believed to have been carried out across Europe in the years immediately following the September 11th attacks. Most of those taken into American custody have been brought here, to the Guantanamo Bay military installation in Cuba. Hundreds of prisoners have been kept here, the vast majority without charge. An unknown number were then delivered to various countries where they were allegedly tortured. And just as in the case of Abu Omar, the U.S. government says it has no knowledge of any such practices. It's not yet known if the Americans will honor the Italian extradition requests, but the trial itself is set to begin on the 8th of June. Owen Fay, Al Jazeera.
Israeli police and Palestinians have clashed again in East Jerusalem amid tight security near Al-Aqsa compound.
Police arrested 15 people and fired tear gas and stun grenades at crowds protesting against Israeli excavation work on the holy site.
And the Palestinian Prime Minister Ismail Haniyeh has called on his countrymen to continue defending the site. Barnaby Phillips reports.
Palestinian frustration in East Jerusalem, but protests were easily contained by an overwhelming Israeli police presence. In the end, there were only a handful of arrests, and many of those detained appeared to be no more than teenagers. Palestinians vented their anger from a distance. Many were not allowed anywhere near the Al-Aqsa compound. The police prevented all men under the age of 50 from entering. So these Muslims prayed just outside the Damascus gate, a roundabout turned into a place of worship in this sadly divided city. And the police always there, keeping a wary eye on it all. Last week, trouble began just as worshippers streamed out of the old city. This week, they dispersed peacefully.
The Israeli police say the security measures they put in place today were successful. But as long as excavations continue around the Al-Aqsa Mosque, Palestinian anger will fester. Barnaby Phillips, Al Jazeera, East Jerusalem.
Meanwhile, the Palestinian Prime Minister-designate Ismail Haniyeh said he hoped to form a long-awaited national unity government within 3 weeks. Addressing worshippers in a Gaza City mosque, Haniyeh said he would start consultations with rival Fatah and independent factions on Saturday. Meanwhile, the US Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice has said she's seen no evidence that the new government would meet the criteria for lifting sanctions on the occupied territories.
And in an interview with Al Jazeera's David Frost, the former Israeli Prime Minister and leader of the opposition Likud party, Benjamin Netanyahu, sent this message to the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas.
Not sanction a government. He will not endorse a government that does not explicitly recognize the state of Israel. What have we been talking about all these years? We've talked about peace. How can they expect us to make peace with somebody who doesn't recognize our right to exist? I certainly recognize the right of the Palestinian people to exist, to govern themselves, to have a future for their children, to have a better life, to have an economy that is free of corruption and these terrible policies that I see around us. I'd like them to partake in the progress that we have in Israel. But for that to happen, they also must make a decision. Abbas has to make that decision, to stand up for the right things, not to be carried away with the wrong things.
And you can see more of that interview with Benjamin Netanyahu on Frost Over the World at 1800 GMT. That is in a little under 1 hour's time. Now, President Bush is likely to face a setback over his plans to send 21,000 more troops into Iraq. After days of fierce debate, the Democratic-controlled US House of Representatives is voting on the issue. Now, the Democrats have come up with a non-binding resolution that they hope would help them constrain Bush's war-making powers.
No more blank check.
The families of Somali refugees have spoken out over what they say is the unfair deportation of their loved ones.
But the Kenyan government says they were deported after being arrested with Islamic court fighters a month ago. Mohammed Ado has this exclusive report.
Aziza Osman's husband and uncle were deported to Somalia last month. Both men, the family says, had escaped the fighting there. But the Kenyan government sent them back. There was no court hearing, no appeal.
My husband is innocent. He's a businessman. He was running away from the violence when he was arrested. The Kenyan authorities wrongfully deported him. I don't know whether he's still alive and well.
Her husband, Bashir Makhtel, a Canadian citizen, was arrested at the Kenya-Somalia border last month. The Kenyan authorities claim he was with about 100 Islamic court fighters and their families trying to cross the frontier. So far, half of these people, including women and children, have been forced back to Mogadishu. Even this 4-year-old girl was held in police custody for 30 days before being released. Within days of the arrests, lawyers turned up here at the Nairobi High Court to argue their clients' cases. They were too late. All the government provided was this passenger manifest. More than 50 people had been bundled onto a plane before the courts could act.
The Kenyan government is not aware of any conflict that is posing a danger to the lives of the people of Somalia. If you go to Mogadishu today, you go to Baidoa and others, you're not seeing bodies on the streets, you're seeing people continuing with their daily lives. And Somalia has a government, the Transitional Federal Government of Somalia, that is in control of the situation.
One of the lawyers for the deportees strongly disagrees.
The international refugee law, the Geneva Convention, has been broken by Kenya. The international human rights law has been broken. There is international customary law that has been broken also by ensuring by the Kenyan government taking people who are in danger back to the danger zone. Taking people who are opposed to, who are likely to be executed, taking them back without the judicial process to which they are entitled wherever in the world they are.
Kenyan Muslims often feel victimized by the government in its campaign against terrorism. Aziza and her mother have had no word from their loved ones since their deportation. They join a lengthening list of people angry and frustrated with their government's actions. Mohammed Ado, Al-Jazeera, Nairobi.
The government of Equatorial Guinea in Central Africa has launched an application to extradite a British man who's accused of plotting a coup in 2004. Former British Special Forces officer Simon Mann was arrested and jailed in Zimbabwe for apparently trying to buy arms as part of the plot. His lawyers say Zimbabwe should reject the request because he'll be severely tortured there. Mann is currently serving a 4-year prison term in Zimbabwe, but it's reported that he's due to be released in May for good behaviour.
And just west of Equatorial Guinea, in Guinea itself, security forces are shooting, beating and robbing civilians under martial law. That's according to rights groups there. The claims come as union leaders prepare for more talks with the government after weeks of unrest. They've reiterated demands for the Prime Minister, a close ally of the President, Lassana Conte, to step down. A state of emergency was declared on Monday to try to halt the protests in which more than 110 people have died.